Hello everyone, I am Amit Choudhury, occupational therapist. Today I'm going to talk about sensory processing disorder. Once you finish this presentation, you will learn what is sensory processing disorder, classification of sensory processing disorder. You will also be able to understand what type of difficulties a child faces when she or he has sensory processing disorder. I will also talk a little bit about management, how you can use few sensory intervention strategy at home, and who are the professional can help you to solve the sensory processing related problems. Before I talk about sensory processing disorder, I must describe you what is sensory processing. I think you already know what is sensations. If you don't know, do not need to be worried, as we are going to watch a video regarding sensations and how it works in our body and brain.
Hi, I'm Shay McAtee. I'm pleased to have you join me as we explore how our senses work together through a process called sensory integration. This makes it possible for us to learn, play, socialize, and just generally function in the world.
But first, I'd like you to meet a friend of mine. He's going to help us understand how important our senses are in everyday life. Like you and me, he learns about the world through his senses. Most people know about 5 of our senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Each of these senses brings us important information. For example, touch helps you know the difference between the feel of a butterfly landing on your arm and the feel of a friend tapping you on the shoulder. There are also 2 other senses that are very important. One is our sense of balance and movement, which comes from our vestibular system. This sense helps us move our body without falling, so we can do activities like walking, riding a bicycle, or even sitting correctly at a desk. It is also the sense that lets you know that you're moving very fast on a roller coaster, even if your eyes are closed. We also get important information from our body position sense, or proprioception. This sense gives you information about the position of your body parts without having to look at them. It helps you do activities like walking upstairs without having to look down at your feet. This sense also tells you how much force to use when doing things like picking up and cracking open an egg. Putting together information from all of these senses makes it possible for us to participate in everyday activities. By integrating or combining all the information we get from our senses, we can make sense of the world around us and successfully move through and interact in our world. Most tasks involve a number of our senses working together. For example, when playing baseball, you need your sense of body position to know how you are standing and the position of your arms holding the bat. You need your sense of touch to grip and move the bat correctly in your hands. Your sense of vision lets you follow the ball with your eyes and helps your body know when to get ready to swing the bat. And your balance and movement sense helps you to stay upright, hit the ball, and run the bases.
We all need to integrate our senses to engage in everyday activities. When everyday activities become frustrating for a child, it may be because they're having trouble organizing and using this information from their senses.
So I think it is much clear for you now that what is sensation. So let me talk about processing. Right now you are listening my voice and you are listening some other sounds as well. It may be air conditioned sound or people are talking around, but you will focusing more on my voice. Now, how it happens? Here, you are getting more than one sounds at a time, and your brain is capable to register all the sounds or auditory stimulations. And in the next level, our brain filter the stimulation. Sometimes we call it discrimination. This discrimination can happen within the same stimulations or among various stimulations. And after the filtration, the most complex stage is called modulation. In this stage, our brain regulates the intensity of a stimulation and organize the stimulation towards the feedback, what we say behavior. So if you are not able to filter other sounds right now when you are listening me, your brain will not be able to control or regulate the intensity of my voice, and because of the overlapping sounds or interrupting stimulations, your feedback will be affected and you will show less attention, or maybe you will be over aroused and stop the presentation here. So you can see there have a structured way where registration happen in the beginning and end with a feedback or behavior. When you hold a bottle for drinking water, it looks like very simple, right? But it is really not so simple. If we analyze this activity, we can see it requires a good integration of some components such as eye-hand coordination, dissociation of body parts, joint stability and movement control. If we go into deep, and we can see for these components we need a good integration of some subcomponents. So what is subcomponents? We can say all the sensations are actually subcomponent. As an example, in order to get a good eye-hand coordination, we need a good integration of visual, proprioception, sense of joint movement, and tactile stimulations or sensations. Yes, there have some other subcomponents also, such as muscles power, tone, which is also very important for eye-hand coordination. But as today we are talking about sensory processing disorder, so we will focus more on sensations. So I think it is now clear to you what is sensory processing disorder. Sensory processing disorder exists when sensory signals do not get organized into appropriate responses. When there have any problem in the way of sensory processing, and problem in directing, regulating, interpreting, and responding to sensory input. There are three types of sensory processing disorder. The first one is sensory modulation disorder, then sensory based motor disorder, and the third one is sensory discrimination disorder. Sensory modulation disorder is a problem to control or regulate the intensity of sensory stimulations. Here, the outcome means behavior depends on a person's neurological threshold and what type of regulation they are. Let me tell you what is neurological threshold. It refers to the amount of stimulation required for a neuron or neuron system to respond. And there have two types of threshold. One is low threshold, it also called quick responder, and the other one is high threshold, means more slowly than expected. There are two types of self-regulator we can see. One is active regulator who try to control the amount and the type of sensory input they receive, and the other type is passive regulator, and those are belonging in the group. They always let things happen then response. Let me explain it through our daily life. Some people feel very active after shower at morning, and some people may not be. They may feel very active after jogging. Here, shower is more about touch or tactile stimulation, and jogging more about vestibular and proprioception. And for some people, 5-minute shower is really not enough to make themselves active. They may need more time. It means they need more stimulations to get aroused to their neural system, because their neurological threshold is high. So they need more stimulation in comparison with low threshold group. And based on this threshold and regulator, there are two types of sensory modulation disorder we can see. One is over responsivity and other one is under responsivity. When a child's neurological threshold is low, they are very reactive to small amount of stimuli, and if the child is passive regulator, he or she will show sensitive behavior. It means even though the child does not like a specific stimulation, but he or she can tolerate it from a certain distance or a certain amount. You may see a fight responses only, and if they can't fight, they will just give up. And he or she will not show any compensative behavior to regulate his arousal system. As an example, a boy is sensitive to soft touch, and he is okay when you put the specific object nearby him, but when he is being touched by the soft object, he may react to, and if you remove it from his comfortable area, he will be fine. But children, those are belonging low threshold with active regulator group, they are always showing avoiding behavior to a particular stimuli, and they will show fight or flight, both responses, with a compensative behaviors. Just now I have given an example of a boy. Now if he is active regulator, and as he is easily become overstimulated by soft touch, he may automatically compensate the stimulation by actively receiving other stimulation. Usually those have soft touch defensiveness. They always compensate it by receiving deep touch or movement. Through the deep touch, they can get proprioception. In the same time, we have to remember that soft touch receptors and deep touch receptors is not same. So the child knows how he can regulate himself by receiving another type of stimulation. It may not be coordinated and organized, and sometimes mistakenly we say that the child may have problem with proprioception seeking or vestibular seeking, but it is not. So when you do an assessment of modulation disorder, you have to be very careful in observation and evaluation of child sensory behavior. So you saw the boy is over aroused by the sounds, and he was trying to control the intensity of the sounds by putting his hand on his ear. But when he could not, he ran away from the place. Here the boy is active regulator, we can say, as he showed the fight and flight responses. Here the child's neurological threshold is high, so he or she needs a lot of input to respond. Again, if the child is passive regulator, someone has to give him or her stimulation in order to make him active within the context. This group of children are always lethargic, even they don't respond when someone calls by their name. They don't seem to notice what is happening around them. It's maybe happen because of their poor registration. But those are active regulators. They always seek for a specific stimuli. It could be sounds, movement, or touch, as they know what stimulation they need to be regulated. When you see a child is continuously moving his or her neck, it may be because of proprioception and vestibular underresponsiveness. You can see often autistic children do finger movement that could be result for vestibular and proprioception stimulation underresponsiveness. So you can understand experienced and enormous knowledge are needed to analyze a child's sensory problem. The second type of sensory processing disorder is sensory-based motor disorder. It is a problem with stabilizing, moving, or planning a series of movement in response to sensory demands, and it occurs when the hidden sense, proprioceptive and vestibular, are impaired. There are two types of sensory-based motor disorder we can see. The first one is dyspraxia and the second one is postural disorder. Dyspraxia is a difficulty to translate sensory information into physical movement, unfamiliar movement, or movement with multiple steps. To understand dyspraxia, we need to understand praxis. Praxis is the ability to perform a novel task. It's sometimes new for the child or a task which requires understanding capacity of environmental demand or consequences, and the demand of situation can be changed anytime, or there will not be any repetitive sequence in order to complete the task. When we play football, we need praxis abilities, as this game sequences is totally unknown that what is going to be happen next. Or when cross a road and there have running cars, we need to plan and get the idea that how we can cross the road. We need to understand when to speed up and when walk slowly by monitoring the car's speed and direction. Once our brain does all the calculations automatically and get the ideas, then our brain coordinate the ideas with motor function in order to perform a task. It is very complex and quick process. We call this motor planning. So we can say praxis requires ideations and motor function. If there have any difficulties in praxis, that is called dyspraxia. Dyspraxia term used in sensory processing disorder, but when a child have a specific diagnosis or brain injury and show some type of difficulties, we call it apraxia. Another type of sensory-based motor disorder is postural disorder. It is a difficulty to maintaining enough control of their bodies to meet the demand of a given motor task. This group of children have poor muscle tone and they are physically weaker comparatively to their peers, and their activity tolerance level is low. They always avoid almost all type of physical activities. In academic wise, their handwriting would be very messy, as their fine motor skills would be affected because of postural disorder. And the third type of sensory processing disorder is sensory discrimination disorder. Those children have sensory discrimination disorder, they often show difficulties in perceptions, and because of their perception difficulties, they face problem almost in all daily living activities as well as social and academic skill. Most of the children with sensory discrimination disorder have poor auditory processing, and comparatively they are better in visual processing. In autism, you can see it often. Feeding problem is very common with sensory discrimination disorder group children, as they really has difficulties to distinguish various taste or shape or size of food. Here I want to mention that feeding problem also can happen in sensory modulation disorder, especially those have tactile and visual defensiveness problem. Before you start a strategy, you must know the principle of strategy. The activity should be child directed and it should be fun and encouraging. If you see your child have modulation problem, you must modify the environment and task. If he or she is defensive to a specific stimulation, introduce the stimulation with gradation. And those are seeking for stimulation, you can create an environment where they can get the stimulation in meaningful way. For example, you can ask the child to play throwing and catching ball while he or she will be jumping on trampoline. You can also use timer to control the intensity. And if you see the child have feeding problem because of a specific texture defensiveness, introduce the texture in playful way. Instead of having that specific food first, you can encourage him or her to play with the food or texture with his interesting food or texture, and slowly you can see his body will be desensitized with that particular texture or the food. But here, when the problem with the food, we really need to understand the hierarchy of food and steps of feeding. I just want to say that don't expect your child will eat the food immediately. If your child have sensory based motor problem, again my advice would be create a safe environment for your child and give him just right challenge, which means a challenge which is neither so easy nor so tough for your child. If he shows little bit effort, he can actually overcome the challenges. You have to give him opportunity to think and plan by himself. And if he really cannot overcome it, then you can give support by giving prompts or cues or by imitations. Remember, the challenges should be novel, but he can practice the task until he become master. And also remember that once he or she is able to overcome that particular challenges by himself, it is no more praxis. It is now only maybe gross motor or fine motor task. And finally, if your child have sensory discrimination disorder, encourage him to play in various environment and help him by giving different prompts or visual, auditory or physical support for learning. Remember, this group of child have slow processing. They need time to understand instruction, especially auditory instruction. You can include visual support when you are giving instruction for something, and don't expect a quick response from them. Encourage them to practice one task at a time so they can do it better. You may need to break down the task also in order to make them understand well. I want you to watch a video where occupational therapist Proshan Naik and his team are conducting a wonderful sensory integration session for a child who has difficulties in motor planning and discrimination of proprioception and vestibular stimulations. And because of these difficulties, his problem in language and communication are found.
কি এটা হাতে এটা কি ডায়মন্ড ডায়মন্ড ভেরি গুড বসো 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 ওই যে
An occupational therapist, physiotherapist, or speech therapist who are trained in sensory processing disorder can help you to solve your child's difficulties. But when the child's problem more in modulation, my recommendation will be only occupational therapy. Remember, if a child have modulation problem, try to recover it first before you start any skill training to get better result. Hope the presentation was fruitful for you. Thank you.